I never imagined that a dream could follow me into reality, yet that night in the dense forests of Pennsylvania changed everything, a place where narrow roads wind through skeletal trees whose branches twist like grasping fingers, where fog rolls in thick and sudden, swallowing everything, and even the faint glow of my headlights feels like it could vanish at any moment, and I was driving back from a late-night work assignment. The long highway stretching endlessly in front of me, silence pressing in from every side, when I saw her, standing by the side of the road, a girl in a white, tattered dress, barely visible through the mist, hair dark and wet, clinging to her face, eyes pale, lifeless, yet strangely familiar, and a chill ran down my spine because I had seen her before, in dreams that had haunted me for 2 weeks, dreams that left me shaking, chasing her through abandoned houses and forgotten barns where the air smelled of rot and damp earth, and now she was here, in the real world, gliding toward me, feet barely touching the ground, the fog seeming to part around her as if she controlled it, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white as I slammed the brakes, tires squealing slightly on the wet asphalt, heart hammering in my chest, unable to move or look away, and she lifted her hand, beckoning, whispering my name, Daniel. Come with me, a voice that echoed with the tone of the dreams, sending shivers down my spine, and though every instinct screamed to drive away, I felt drawn forward, the car moving almost on its own, my body frozen in the passenger seat while my mind screamed, and she led me to a house at the end of the road, a crumbling, abandoned structure hidden behind overgrown weeds, windows shattered, walls blackened by age, the front door hanging crookedly on its hinges, and I stepped out of the car, the night air instantly cold and biting, my breath fogging before me, the silence so thick that even the distant hoot of an owl sounded deafening, and she stood there, waiting, her eyes fixed on mine, glowing faintly in the darkness, and I knew that crossing the threshold of that house would change everything, that the world I knew would vanish, replaced by something that should not exist, and yet the pull was irresistible, drawing me forward step by trembling step into the darkness she commanded, and as I entered, the fog seemed to seep inside with us, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay, and I realized I could not tell where the house ended and the dream began, shadows twisting in corners that should have been empty, walls warped, groaning under unseen pressure, the floorboards creaking with every step as though they whispered secrets from another time, and she walked ahead, gliding silently, her dress fluttering slightly. Though no wind passed, the dim moonlight filtering through broken windows casting elongated, grotesque shadows that moved with a life of their own, and I felt, with a growing dread, that something was watching from those shadows, something old and patient, and her voice came again, soft, almost melodic, yet carrying a weight I could not comprehend. You've seen me in your dreams, now see me in truth, and I took a hesitant step closer, the chill radiating from her like ice through my bones, and then the air shifted, the temperature dropping sharply, my teeth chattering involuntarily, and I realized that the house was alive, or at least something within it was, something that had waited for me for longer than I could imagine, and as I followed her through the hallway, I noticed details that defied logic. The walls were covered in scratches, deep gouges that formed patterns that made no sense yet seemed deliberate. Floors warped unnaturally, doors that should open slammed shut as I approached, windows that were broken whispered with the sound of wind, yet the wind had no source, and I knew I was no longer in the world I had left, that every step further inside pulled me deeper into a nightmare I could not wake from, and she stopped at a doorway, her hand reaching for the frame, fingers passing through solid wood like smoke, and she turned to me, eyes locking onto mine, unblinking, and whispered, "Do you trust me?" And I wanted to say no, to run, to scream, yet I felt a tether pulling at my heart, a connection formed in the dream now manifest in reality, and without thinking, I nodded, and the doorway dissolved before me, revealing a room filled with shadows that moved as if alive, shapes crawling along walls, whispering unintelligible words, and the chill became unbearable, seeping into my bones, freezing my thoughts. Yet I felt compelled to follow, and she led me through corridors that twisted impossibly, hallways that stretched longer than they could, ceilings higher than reason would allow, doors that led to rooms filled with mirrors reflecting not me but events I had never lived, and I caught glimpses of my own past, distorted, twisted by something ancient, something that had been watching, waiting, shaping me without my knowledge, and each reflection whispered secrets, each shadow moved deliberately, and she walked beside me, guiding, comforting, yet terrifying in her stillness, and I realized that I had entered a place between worlds, a space where the dreamscape had bled into reality, and I was trapped in the intersection, where logic faltered and fear ruled, and I felt, with absolute certainty, that the house, the shadows, the woman herself were aware of every thought I had ever had, every fear, every regret, and they weighed upon me, pressing my chest with an invisible hand, and she stopped before a large mirror, cracked and fractured, yet intact, and she turned to me, her eyes locking with mine, and for a moment, I saw not her, but the reflection of a girl I had been chasing for years in dreams, her expression sad, pleading, accusing, and then the room shifted, walls melting into darkness, and her voice came, layered, almost a chorus, "You should never have opened the door, Daniel. And now you must see what lies beyond it," and I felt myself drawn forward involuntarily, unable to resist, and the darkness swallowed me, the fog followed, the shadows crawled toward me, and I realized that my heartbeat, my sanity, my very existence was dangling on the edge of a world that had never been meant for me, yet I could not turn back, I could not close my eyes, and I could not stop moving forward, toward her, toward the unknown, toward the nightmare that had been waiting for me. And as I stepped deeper into the room, the mirror shattered, glass exploding outward but without sound, fragments hovering midair before dissolving into mist, and I heard her laughter, soft, haunting, impossible, echoing from everywhere and nowhere, and I knew, in a way that made my stomach tighten, that this night was just beginning, that the house, the fog, the shadows, and the woman were only the first part of a terror that would follow me beyond sleep, beyond reason, beyond life itself. I don't remember exactly when I lost my sense of time, whether minutes or hours had passed in that room of shadows, only that the air had thickened, pressing against my lungs, making each breath a struggle, and she stood before me, the woman from my dreams, pale and silent, her eyes reflecting a depth of despair I couldn't comprehend, and then the room began to shift, the walls bending in on themselves like liquid, corners folding into impossible angles, shadows spilling across the floor as if they had lives of their own, and I realized that I was no longer entirely in the house, nor in the world I had left behind, the forest outside, the narrow highway, even my car, all of it felt distant, replaced by a labyrinth of darkness that seemed endless, and she gestured for me to follow, gliding effortlessly over the warped floor, and I did, compelled by a mixture of fear, fascination, and the inexplicable tether I felt to her, and as I walked, the shadows thickened, crawling up the walls, whispering my name, forming shapes that resembled faces I recognized, friends, strangers, people I had seen in passing, and their mouths moved silently, mouthing words I could not hear, and each time I tried to look away, their faces dissolved only to return moments later, closer, more insistent, and she turned to me once, a faint smile curving her lips, yet it carried no warmth, only the promise of a terror I could not imagine. And then the floor beneath me shuddered, groaning, as if the house itself had become aware of my presence, and I realized with a cold certainty that it was alive, or perhaps controlled by something that had waited decades, maybe centuries, for someone like me to stumble into its grip, and my chest tightened, my heart racing as I tried to rationalize, to tell myself this was a nightmare, yet I knew, deep in my bones, that this was no dream, not anymore. And we passed through a doorway that led into a long corridor, lined with doors on either side, each one slightly ajar, dark shapes lurking within, and as we walked, the whispers grew louder, forming words, phrases that promised pain, death, despair, and I felt a hand brush against my shoulder, icy cold, making me stumble, and she whispered, "They're watching you." They always watch, and I turned, trying to see what she meant, but the corridor was empty, or so I thought, yet the shadows continued to shift, slithering along walls, crawling across the floor toward me, and I knew that they were not ordinary shadows, they had intent, a hunger, and I felt my sanity fraying with every step, every breath, every heartbeat, and she paused before a door unlike the others, blackened wood, almost pulsating, as if it were breathing, and she pressed her hand to it. And it swung open silently, revealing a room flooded with a fog so thick I could barely see my own hands, and the temperature dropped drastically, my skin crawling as frost formed on my eyelashes, and then I heard it, faint at first, the sound of footsteps echoing behind me, slow, deliberate, yet I had no memory of anyone entering, and she stepped inside, beckoning me with that same haunting gaze, and I followed, my mind screaming to turn back, yet my body obeying a force beyond my control, and inside the fog, shapes moved, human, yet not human, limbs bent at impossible angles, faces pale and melting, mouths opening wide to emit silent screams, eyes staring into mine with an intelligence that chilled me to the core, and she moved among them, unafraid, unaffected, as if she were one of them, and I realized then that my dreams had been a warning, a glimpse of a reality I had unknowingly summoned, and every memory I had of sleep, of seeing her in dark places, of running and screaming, had been leading me here, into this moment, and my chest felt tight, my muscles frozen as I struggled to comprehend what she wanted from me, and then the fog parted slightly, revealing a mirror, cracked, fractured, yet reflecting not me, but an endless expanse of the forest I had driven through, twisted, shadowed, impossible, and I saw glimpses of myself running, screaming, falling, over and over, yet I never moved, only watched, paralyzed by the vision and the growing terror of what was happening, and she reached out, her fingers brushing against the glass, and the reflection rippled, distorting further, and I realized that she could reach through it, could pull things through from another realm, and then the whispers coalesced into a single voice, a chorus of voices overlapping, chanting my name, promising pain, promising death, promising an eternity trapped in a world between worlds, and she turned toward me, eyes wide, pupils black, and said softly, almost tenderly, "You have to choose, Daniel. Step through, or stay, and be forgotten," and I stumbled backward, my mind reeling, unable to comprehend the choice, for every instinct screamed to run, yet every fiber of my being was drawn forward, toward her, toward the mirror, toward the unknown, and I felt my heart pound violently as the shadows pressed closer, their forms solidifying, twisting, limbs elongating, faces melting into grotesque parodies of life, and I knew, with sickening clarity, that if I moved wrong, would be devoured, consumed, erased, and yet if I did not move, would be trapped, forever lost in this labyrinth of fog, mirrors, and shadows, and I remember taking one trembling step forward, my foot hitting the cold floor with a clack that echoed endlessly, and then another, drawn inexorably toward the mirror, toward her, and the shadows surged, a wave of darkness that wrapped around my legs, cold and suffocating, yet she remained calm, a silent guide through the chaos, and as I approached the mirror, the glass seemed to breathe, expanding, contracting, rippling like liquid. And the whispers became screams, voices of people I knew, people I had never met, all crying, pleading, warning me, and she reached out, touching my cheek with a hand that burned cold, a paradox that made my skin crawl, and said, "You've already come this far, don't stop now," and I stepped through, the mirror engulfing me, cold glass giving way like water, and for a moment, I felt weightless, suspended in darkness. And then I landed on hard ground, my knees scraping against gravel, and the fog was gone, replaced by a dimly lit forest, thick with mist, the trees towering impossibly high, branches like skeletal claws, and the ground moved, undulating slightly, as if breathing, and I realized with horror that the forest was alive, watching me, responding to me, anticipating my next step, and she was there, standing silently, just a few feet away, watching, waiting, and I wanted to scream, to run, to beg for my life. Yet no sound came from me, as if the forest had swallowed it, and I knew, in that instant, that I was no longer entirely human, no longer in the world I knew, my mind tethered between realms, pulled by forces I could neither comprehend nor resist, and she extended her hand again, voice soft, melodic, carrying the weight of inevitability, "Follow me, Daniel, and you will see everything," and I did, each step forward taking me deeper into the nightmare. Past trees that seemed to twist when I wasn't looking, shadows that grew and shrank at will, and the whispers of the dead brushing against my ears, naming sins I had never committed but felt guilty for, shaping reality around me, and I realized that in stepping forward, I had abandoned safety, reason, and sanity, and there was no turning back, only the unknown, the forest, the shadows, and her, waiting for me to surrender completely to the terror that had begun in my dreams and had now consumed my waking life. And I knew that what awaited me would forever change the way I perceived reality, fear, death, and the spaces in between, and as the forest grew darker, the fog curling around my ankles like grasping fingers, I understood with absolute certainty that the woman who had followed me out of my dreams was not merely a figment, not a hallucination, but a harbinger of something ancient, something patient, something that had been waiting for me all along, and my scream was caught in my throat as the shadows surged forward. The mist thickened, and the world I knew vanished completely, leaving only her, the forest, and the unending terror of what was to come. The forest seemed endless, a maze of blackened trunks and tangled roots, twisting and stretching in ways that defied logic, and every step I took, the ground seemed to shift beneath me, the mist curling like serpents around my ankles, whispering in voices I recognized but couldn't place, voices of strangers, friends, enemies, and people long dead, and I felt them watching me, judging me, laughing at me, as though I had trespassed into a realm where time and reason no longer mattered, and the woman walked ahead, silent, her form illuminated by an unearthly glow, eyes fixed forward yet seeing everything, and I wanted to call out to her, ask her what she wanted from me, why she had dragged me from the safety of my own world into this living nightmare, but the words caught in my throat, swallowed by the dense fog that now seemed almost solid, pressing against my chest, squeezing my lungs, and my heartbeat raced, echoing through the forest like a drum announcing my trespass, announcing my helplessness. And then I saw it, a clearing, but not a normal clearing, a circle of ancient trees whose branches arched overhead, forming a twisted cathedral of gnarled wood and shadows, and at the center, the ground was scorched black, as if fire had eaten the soil, and a strange mist hovered above it, moving like smoke but shaped like screaming faces, and I felt a pull toward it, irresistible, magnetic, as though the forest itself demanded I step into the center, and the woman stopped at the edge of the clearing, turning to me, her eyes wide, impossibly dark, and said, "They've been waiting for you. You're late, Daniel. You've finally arrived." And I realized then that she had known me before, long before I had ever dreamed of her, and my dreams were not dreams, but warnings, premonitions of this moment, and I tried to retreat, to step back into the trees, but the fog thickened, solidifying into forms that blocked my path, humanoid shadows with limbs bent like broken dolls. Faces twisted in expressions of agony and hunger, and they whispered my name, their breath cold against my ears, and I felt the weight of centuries pressing down on me, the expectation of something ancient and merciless, and she stepped forward, hand outstretched, and I wanted to resist, but my body moved before my mind could protest, and I followed her into the circle, the ground beneath me blackened and slick, as if it were soaked in blood, though no smell reached my nose, yet I felt the darkness seeping into my skin, into my very bones, and she stopped at the center, turning slowly, her voice a whisper yet cutting through the cacophony of screams and whispers, "You have to see it to understand it. Open your eyes, Daniel," and I did, and the sky above the clearing tore open, not a sky of blue or clouds, but a void, black and alive, swirling with shadows that moved like living things, eyes blinking open and closed within it, mouths forming silent cries, and I felt myself drawn upward, as though gravity had reversed, and the forest floor fell away, leaving me suspended between the clearing below and the impossible sky above. And then I saw them, figures emerging from the void, humanoid yet wrong, limbs elongated, torsos twisted, faces melting like wax, eyes hollow but glowing, mouths opening wider than possible to emit silent screams, their forms moving in patterns I could not understand, yet perfectly synchronized, like dancers in a ritual older than humanity, and I felt them examining me, studying me, and I realized that this place was not just a forest, not just a clearing, but a nexus, a threshold between our world and something older, crueler, infinitely patient, and the woman was at my side, her hand brushing against mine, sending shivers through my body, her touch cold and warm at the same time, and she said, "They want to know if you belong here. If you can endure what comes next," and I tried to speak, to ask her what would happen if I failed, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the void, and the shadows began to descend, moving faster, circling me, the forest bending as they approached, trees elongating and twisting, branches reaching like arms, and I felt a weight on my shoulders, crushing, suffocating, yet she held me steady, whispering, "Focus. Only your will can guide you now," and I realized that she was not guiding me, not leading me, but testing me, that her presence was both a lure and a safeguard, a paradox I could not unravel, and then the shadows surged, pressing against me, merging with the fog, crawling over my skin, and I felt their cold seep into my blood, into my mind, filling my thoughts with visions of my failures, my fears, my most secret sins. And I screamed, though no sound emerged, and I saw the woman step back, her eyes glowing now, reflecting the void above, and said, "See. They remember everything you've tried to forget. Every lie, every deceit, every betrayal, every moment you've hidden from yourself. You cannot hide here." And I tried to fight, to resist, but my body felt like lead, my limbs refusing commands, my mind fractured, and I understood, with a terror so complete it burned my soul, that this was not a place of death, not yet, but of judgment, of revelation, of exposure, and the shadows whispered truths I had never admitted, memories of moments when I had been cruel, selfish, fearful, cowardly, moments I had buried deep, now forced to surface, and I felt my sanity fraying, threads snapping in my mind as the woman stepped forward, closer, her face inches from mine, her breath cold and smelling of mist, of decay, and she said, "You can endure this, Daniel, but only if you accept it, only if you embrace it, only if you let go of the lies you tell yourself." And I realized then that she was not just a figure of terror, not just a phantom from my dreams, but a catalyst, a guide through a trial I had never known, and I felt the shadows press harder, their whispers now a chorus of screams, a flood of images, memories, fears, regrets, all crashing over me, and I was drowning in them, unable to resist, unable to flee, and the woman placed her hand over my heart, a counterweight to the storm, and whispered, "Anchor yourself. Do not let them pull you under. Remember who you are, and why you came here." And I clawed at my memory, grasping at threads of reality, recalling the streets of my town, the car I had parked near the highway, the real world I had left behind, the warmth of sunlight, the smell of asphalt after rain, the normal life I had taken for granted, and slowly, painfully, I felt the shadows weaken, the fog lift, the trees relax, and the void above recede slightly, though the figures remained, circling, watching, waiting, and I realized that I was surviving not by strength, not by fear, but by the clarity of my will, by my refusal to surrender entirely to the terror. And the woman stepped closer, pressing her forehead against mine, her eyes locking on mine, and whispered, "You are ready." And I knew, in that instant, that this was not the end, but the beginning of something far worse, far larger, far more incomprehensible, and the shadows recoiled slightly, giving space, and I took a shaky breath, my chest heaving, legs trembling, and I saw paths open in the fog, corridors of twisted trees leading deeper into the forest, and she said, "Follow me, and you will learn. Refuse, and you will be consumed. The choice is yours." And I realized then that she had never given me a choice at all, that my entire journey had been orchestrated by forces I could not name, and yet my fear, my desperation, my instinct for survival propelled me forward, step by step, into the unknown, into the nightmare, into the forest that lived and breathed around me, and I understood, with a clarity that chilled me to the core, that there was no returning to the world I had known, that the woman from my dreams, the shadows, the forest, the void, they were now part of me, inseparable, unavoidable, eternal, and I was walking willingly, drawn by the same force that had brought me here, aware that the next steps would demand more than courage, more than reason, more than sanity, and I was powerless to resist, yet compelled to continue, and the forest whispered my name, the shadows reached, the void watched, and she walked ahead, silently, patiently, inexorably, leading me toward a fate that I could not yet imagine, and I knew that when I reached it, I would understand why the woman had followed me out of my dreams, and why I had been chosen. The forest seemed to stretch infinitely, each step I took echoing like thunder, yet the sound was swallowed by the mist, leaving only the pounding of my heart, the rhythm of terror, and the whispering of shadows that clung to my ankles and climbed my legs like icy fingers. And the woman walked ahead, unyielding, silent, her glow cutting through the darkness as though she were both a beacon and a warning, and I followed, compelled by something deeper than fear, something primal, something that whispered my name in the voices of everyone I had ever loved and lost, and I realized that the path she led me down was no ordinary trail but a corridor carved from nightmare, the trees arching into grotesque shapes, their bark crawling with movement, faces appearing and disappearing in the knots, mouths opening in silent screams, eyes blinking with malice, and I tried to resist, tried to turn back, but the fog thickened behind me, coiling like a serpent, cutting off retreat, pressing me forward, and in that instant, I knew that every choice I had made, every trivial act in my waking life, had led me here, to this nexus of horror, to this forest that was alive, patient, and hungry, and the woman stopped suddenly, and I nearly ran into her, her eyes boring into mine, blacker than any shadow, deeper than any void, and she whispered, "This is the end of the threshold, Daniel. Beyond here lies what you have always feared. Only those who accept it can survive. Those who resist are claimed," and a shiver ran down my spine that felt like ice in my veins, freezing my blood, and I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, shapes emerging from the fog, figures that seemed human but whose limbs were impossibly long, whose heads tilted at unnatural angles, whose eyes glowed with hunger, and they circled the perimeter like predators, waiting, testing, and I realized that they were not just shadows, not just hallucinations, but the remnants of countless souls who had walked this path and failed, tethered to the forest forever, and the woman extended her hand, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something human, pity, or maybe warning, and she said, "You must trust me. Nothing else will save you," and I hesitated, every fiber of my being screaming to flee, yet something deeper, a magnetic pull, rooted me to her side, and together we stepped into the heart of the clearing, where the air thickened and vibrated with energy that felt both alive and ancient, the fog twisting into spirals that formed faces and hands, reaching, clawing, begging, screaming, and I felt their despair, their rage, their endless suffering, as though the forest itself was alive with pain. And the woman's hand tightened on mine, sending a jolt of warmth and light into my chest, anchoring me, and she whispered, "Look. See what you cannot unsee," and I understood that the trial was not just of fear but of understanding, of witnessing the unfiltered truth of this realm, and as I looked, the shadows shifted, and I saw visions of countless deaths, the echoes of people who had vanished in the night, pulled into nightmares much like this, their last moments replaying endlessly, screaming in silent agony, and I felt a pull toward one vision, a boy trapped beneath a train, calling for help, his face twisted in terror, and another of a woman drowning in black water that shimmered like ink, her hands reaching out as though seeking me, and the woman said, "You are the witness. You are the one they cannot touch. Your fear is the key. Your will is the shield," and I realized then that she was not just leading me but testing me, my ability to endure the full weight of this place, the knowledge of pain and death and the creeping inevitability of despair, and the shadows pressed closer, brushing against me, and I felt the cold seep into my bones, filling me with memories of my failures, my guilt, my shame, the moments I had buried. And I screamed, though no sound emerged, and the woman pressed her forehead against mine, and in that instant, I saw her truth. She had been trapped here, drawn from my dreams long before I had been born, a soul caught between realms, a guide for the living who dared trespass into the abyss, and her eyes shimmered with countless lifetimes of sorrow, warning, and determination, and then the ground beneath the clearing shifted, cracking like ice, revealing black depths that seemed infinite, and from the depths, hands rose, gnarled and clawed, grasping, and I felt a pull toward them, a force trying to drag me into the darkness, and my body resisted, my mind screaming to flee, yet I did not move, rooted by the woman's presence, and she whispered, "Focus. Only your will keeps you here," and I clenched my fists, anchored in the memory of my life, my family, the streets I had walked, the sun on my skin, the wind in my hair, and slowly, agonizingly, I felt the pull weaken, the hands retreat, the fog thinning, and the shadows recoiling, murmuring, whispering, acknowledging my endurance, and I stumbled backward, exhausted, trembling, yet alive, and she followed, eyes locked on mine, and said, "You have survived the first trial. But the forest does not forgive. It remembers," and I realized then that even though I had endured, nothing would ever be the same, that the forest, the shadows, the void, and she, the woman, had now entered my life permanently, invisible yet present, a constant whisper at the edge of reality, and I felt the weight of that knowledge crush me, my breath ragged, heart pounding, sanity teetering, and I knew I had a choice: to run, to deny it, or to accept that I had glimpsed a world that most could never imagine, a world of living nightmares. And with a shaky hand, I reached out to the woman, and she smiled, a flicker of warmth in a face carved from darkness, and whispered, "You chose to see. You chose to remember. Now you must live with it." And I nodded, tears streaming down my face, though I felt no shame, only awe and terror intermingled, and together we walked from the clearing, through the forest that now seemed slightly less hostile, though I could feel it watching, judging, waiting. And as we reached the edge, where the first light of dawn touched the American pines, where the fog dissolved into the morning, I felt a strange sense of relief, a fragile reprieve. And she stopped, hand hovering just above mine, and whispered, "I will leave now, but remember, every time you sleep, every dream, every shadow you see in your waking world, I will be there. Watching. Waiting. Guiding. Sometimes mercifully. Sometimes not." And before I could speak, before I could ask her anything, she turned, her form fading into the morning mist, leaving me alone, trembling, alive, but irrevocably changed. And I knew then that sleep would never again be safe, that dreams would no longer be mine, that the veil between the world I knew and the one she inhabited had been torn, and I was now a bridge, a witness, a survivor, trapped between reality and nightmare. And as I stumbled to the highway, sunlight reflecting off wet asphalt, trees swaying gently in the morning breeze, the woman's final words echoed in my mind, "You will see me again. Sooner than you think." And I felt the truth of them deep in my soul, the creeping certainty that my life was no longer my own, that horror had followed me out of dreams and into the waking world, and every shadow, every whisper, every flicker of movement at the corner of my vision, would forever remind me that the line between sleep and reality was gone, that terror had become a companion, and that the forest, the shadows, and the woman were now a permanent part of my existence, eternal. Patient, unyielding, and I knew that no amount of distance, light, or time could undo what had begun in that night, in the clearing, in the forest where the dead and the dreaming intertwined, and I would never, ever walk alone again. Thank you so much for watching the entire video. And to get more videos like this, please like and subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell icon beside it. Thank you.